Hey, Team Brantford, welcome back to another episode of the Brantford Sessions. This is the final episode of the Rochelle Trilogy. So I'm chatting with Rochelle about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the environment and also how she uses data to guide her strategy. Now, COVID-19 has been a huge test for the world, and if you ask me, I give the world the same score that my grade 10 math teacher gave me, which was 48%. I cannot believe that jerk did not bump me up to a 50%, but he didn't. Anyways, the point is that I failed grade 10 math, and in my opinion, I think the world has failed the COVID test. Now, as with any great failure, we had better be learning something and applying it to the next test, which, just for the record, I learned from my failure and I passed grade 10 math a second time. Barely, but I passed. Once the world has moved on from COVID and everyone's vaccinated, our next test is going to be fixing the environmental catastrophe that we have caused over the last decades. And I'm of the opinion that if we take the same narrow-minded and selfish approach that we took with COVID, we could be in big trouble. So let's hear what Rochelle has to say about that.
Have you been able to do any research on the impact that COVID-19 has had on the environment? You hear the stories of, like bears walking through cities because they're taking over space that perhaps they haven't been in for so long because of just society's changing a bit. What's your learning on that? What have you taken away from that?
Yeah, well, some of the stories that I was really interested in at the beginning was these cities that were sort of experiencing their first like smog-free days for years, right? So people were driving less, and then suddenly people were like, oh, we don't live under a cloud of smog permanently. And just that awareness raising that, I think that an impact like that had that you wouldn't get like unless in any other circumstance probably. And so whether or not those impacts will make a difference long term, at least there was sort of that moment of clarity, like literally for people to understand that, yeah, a carbon-free future would be beneficial in all sorts of ways. Yeah, and I think just like the scale that COVID forced us to act in, right? Like we had to have sort of this global effort to fight this pandemic, which is also sort of the scale that might be necessary for climate change at some point, right? I think so just to realize that it's possible, and not that anybody wants to go through this ever again, but that those global efforts and even at the federal level, like that we have the ability to make those big changes if we need to.
And so has there been new modeling and forecasting done? Like, do we expect to see some permanent changes as a result of behaviors and the impact that it has on the environment because of COVID-19? Or at the end of this, once we announce that everyone's been vaccinated and the world goes back to normal, do we expect that things are normal with the environment?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I do think that some of these more permanent changes, like the working from home, is going to have a big impact, because I think this was sort of that wake up call that people can work from home and still get their job done. And so employers can, were forced to trust their employees and learned that they can. And so if you eliminate all of those emissions from commuting to work every day, that's a major change, and sort of sort of that systemic change that's required as well, where you have to sort of reimagine how you can live while reducing your emissions. So I think that's going to be a big one, and I think that that's going to stick around. Certainly, the City of Brantford is taking that step to sort of make that permanent change, and that's going to be huge.
I hope so, and I agree with that completely. And I will say that I am super proud that Brantford's leading the charge when it comes to this work from home model. It's culturally, it's a big shift. And I know that we've been kind of working from home since the beginning of this pandemic for almost a year now, but this formalizing it, making it official that this is going to be a permanent solution, and and putting some numbers around it, and changing the way that we do business as a result of that, to me, is such a huge step forward for the organization. So culturally, but also there's obviously stats around the impact that this is going to have in the environment for us. And it's great that we are leaders when it comes to having these conversations and making decisions around it. So I'm pumped about that for sure.
Yeah, me too. Really great.
The work that you do is so connected cross-functionally across the entire organization. So for those areas of the city that are looking to see how they can become more environmentally sustainable and integrate some of those best practices into their work, how do they go about doing that? How do they reach out to you, and what should they be doing as a first step there?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, definitely. I'm always available. So people definitely feel free to reach out to me at any point. But as a corporation, we are developing a tool. So one of the things that came out of back in 2019, the city declared a climate emergency. And one of the things that came out of that declaration was the development of this climate lens tool. So we're working on that. I was actually just talking to IT about how they're progressing with developing that in SharePoint. So it will start to gather information from staff reports on how they are contributing, like how many emissions will be produced from a particular project, but also different initiatives that they might be taking to look at how they can reduce emissions or reduce waste or reduce stormwater. And so just giving them that tool to start thinking about these different things, and to sort of think about more of those life cycle impacts as well. So
I know that these conversations have been around for a long time, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface. So there's still so much that we can do. And this is obviously, the creation of your position is a huge step forward to formalizing that and actually, being serious about it and putting the plan together. So I just feel like you're going to be a very busy person. There's no way around this. There's a lot of work to do, and it's very important work. So you got a lot of work in front of you, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, right now at the beginning, we're also trying to just get these plans in place so that we can, have a strategy for the long term. But it's also been really great, like working with all the different departments and all the people around the city, and to know that a lot of this stuff is already happening. And it's, just sort of adding that climate change language or lens to it, to sort of say, oh, look at this great initiative that's already happening. So, it's certainly not just me that's doing this work. Like some people are already doing it, and others, are certainly willing to take that step. So, yeah, there's a lot of work for everybody. I think. For sure.
That's good. It's good that you're not on a lonely island, perhaps. I mean, that there's support there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's really impressed me with the work that you're doing is how you are using data. I'm just wondering if you can provide some context around how you use data to to just leverage the work that you do. Like how is it you guide the strategy of your work through data?
Yeah, so there's certainly lots of data out there right now, especially on climate change, and there's so much so much modeling data that different organizations are putting together to sort of say, this is where we are today, and based on the emissions cuts that we can achieve, this is where we'll be in the long term. So there's a lot of that out there, and there's some really good resources developed even in Canada to look at different modeling for Canada. So I rely a lot on that, and then sort of using that information to pick out some relevant impacts that I think that Brantford will feel, to sort of connect, on a real level to people, right? Like people hear a lot about sea level rise or more hurricanes, and like that's not likely to impact us here, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't care still, because we're likely to experience a lot more like heat waves. And I don't know about you, but I get super grumpy when it's like super hot out.
Yeah, and I don't play well in the extremes. Like just give me normal temperature, right? Like when it's winter time, I expect snow, I expect cold temperatures. When it's summertime, I expect warm temperatures. But it just seems like this whole global warming has just created, like, it seems like we're always playing in the extremes. Like it's going to be like 19 degrees tomorrow. Like what the heck, right?
Mhm.
Like we're just, it seems like it's always one extreme or the other now these days.
Yeah. Well, and I think another piece of climate change is just sort of like that unpredictability, which is hard, right? So you can't, on a day-to-day level, it's hard to know what coat to wear. But then also when you look at sort of larger systems like agriculture is potentially going to be hugely impacted by, not knowing how much rain you're going to get or how much, what the temperatures are going to be and how long your growing season is going to be, and some other, larger scale impacts like that. So that's going to be more challenging, certainly, as we move through this and figure out what the impacts are going to be, because the modeling is really just a model. It's hard to really know what's going to happen. But we're at a point, I think, where we can, if we act now and sort of meet those 2050 goals that we've laid out, we can really reduce the most dangerous extremes of this situation. So
All right, maybe my opening monologue was a little harsh. Maybe we haven't completely failed COVID to the same degree that I failed grade 10 math, which I didn't realize I still carried a great deal of resentment for until this exact moment. But you do have to admit, we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to meet the targets set out in the Paris Accord. So here's my light bulb moment. To the world's credit, leaders have come together, they created a vision for the future on how to tackle the climate crisis. They've then used that vision to guide the strategy and to set targets. Now they're collecting data and monitoring performance. Just imagine if we use this same approach to guide our strategy at the City of Brantford. Well, actually, that's exactly what we do. So thanks for tuning in. If you're doing something awesome with the city that you'd like featured in a future episode of the Brantford Sessions, please reach out. I would love to chat. I hope you enjoyed this series with Rochelle. I learned a lot about the environment. I hope you did too. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.